What would a perfect offseason look like for the Boston Bruins?
You're Locked On Bruins, your daily podcast on the Boston Bruins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Bruins fans, and welcome back to the Locked On Boston Bruins podcast. I'm your host, Ian McLaren, and this is a daily show where we discuss all things Spoked B. Today is Friday, June 7th, and I want to thank you so much for making Locked On Bruins part of your daily routine. Free and available on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Now, back when I was at the Score, I had a colleague named Justin Bourne, and he was famous partly for doing a Thoughts on Thoughts column for the Score, where he would take Elliot Friedman's 32 thoughts and offer some thoughts of his own. And that's kind of the idea behind today's episode. Yesterday, Fluto Shinzawa of The Athletic posted a Boston Bruins dream offseason. So I'm going to go through there point by point and offer some thoughts on some of his ideas on what the dream offseason would look like. Before we get to that, a quick reminder, you can find the podcast on social media at Locked NHL Bruins, and you can find me, my dad jokes, hockey thoughts at Ian C. McLaren. I am a lifelong Boston Bruins fan. I've been covering this team for various outlets for about 20 years. My first blog post was about the Joe Thornton trade. And been hosting this podcast for 5 years. For 5 years prior to that, I worked for The Score as a full-time hockey news editor. Now let's begin with the goaltending portion of Fluto Shinzawa's dream offseason for the Boston Bruins. And it begins with, I know people don't want to hear this, but a Linus Ullmark trade. Fluto writes, acquiring Martin Necas from the Hurricanes would be a big step in reinforcing the offense, but it's unlikely the Bruins would have the additional assets required to make that deal happen. But clearing Ullmark's $5 million average annual value and receiving futures in return would be a satisfactory conclusion. He mentions the New Jersey Devils, who expressed interest in trading the number 10 pick, and the Buffalo Sabres have come out and said they might be willing to trade the number 11 pick, perhaps setting up a Ullmark reunion with the Sabres, although the Bruins may be reluctant to trade him within their own division. It might be tough enough to trade him in the conference to a very talented up-and-coming team like the Devils, but at the end of the day, clearing that $5 million is huge, and you get that cap space. Whether or not you acquire a player in return, that's not necessarily the priority, because if you clear that cap space, that's $5 million that you can use towards signing a player in free agency or adding elsewhere via another trade. Look, people don't want this to happen. I'm not huge on the idea either. I love the goalie hug. The Bruins tandem of Ullmark and Jeremy Swayman has been tops in the NHL for a couple years now. But the reality is it's a lot more palpable to ride with that tandem when Ullmark's making $5 million and Swayman's making under $4 million. There's very few, if any, I can't think of any other NHL teams where the number one goalie is making 6, 7, 8 million, and then the backup or quote 1B is making $5 million. The only thing that comes close to me is Bobrovsky making $10 million. They have Spencer Knight signed at like 4 or something, but he's been buried in the minors over the past couple of seasons. Nowhere else that I can think of, correct me if I'm wrong, with a goaltending tandem that accounts for $12, $13 million against the cap, where it's more of an equal separation between the two than a guy making like 9 and a backup making 1 or 2. It just doesn't happen. And for the Bruins to be able to clear that cap space and add scoring elsewhere, it just makes all the sense in the world. This would clear the way, according to Fluto, for Jeremy Swayman to be the number one and Brandon Bussi to be the backup. Again, I don't have an appetite per se to trade Linus Ullmark, but we saw in the playoffs, Jeremy Swayman take the job, run with it, and you had $5 million sitting on the bench when that could have been more allocated towards a scoring winger when the Bruins are losing like 2-1 games. They have a seemingly capable backup in Bussi, or they go out and sign a veteran free agent on the cheap to back up Swayman. It's just not economically sound to carry those two guys when one of them is making $5 million and the others do a raise that will pay him 6-7. And that's the other part of the dream offseason here in net for the Bruins, according to Fluto Shinzawa, signing Swayman to a long-term extension. This is the goal for both parties. He writes, Swayman likes being a Bruin. The team has a good trove of data following the playoffs to determine that Swayman at 25 is capable of ace performance. Far more productive outcome than Swayman signing an offer sheet, which is a possibility until he signs a contract extension. 3 years ago, UC Saros signed a 4-year, $20 million contract with the Predators. He was 26 at the time. He had 155 games of NHL experience and a career .920 save percentage. Swayman has 144 NHL appearances and a .920 save percentage. Now, the economics of the game have changed over that time. The cap is increasing. But if you're using the Saros deal as a baseline, Fluto's projecting a 5-year, $30 million contract for Swayman. Gives him security, but also a chance at another score in a few years when he's 30. The Bruins get 5 years of relative certainty in net. Will Swayman settle for a deal that pays him only $6 million? Who knows? He could very easily command more than that, at least 7, based on his performance, his trajectory, his potential that is being realized in front of our very eyes. But the more he gets paid, the less likely it is that they can carry that tandem. So maybe he takes a hometown discount in an attempt to keep Ullmark around for another year. And then they sign Ullmark at a more reasonable rate next offseason as he enters his later years of his career. I mean, that would be a dream scenario, would be keeping Ullmark and Swayman signing a deal that is less than market value. Not likely to happen. And to be fair, Swayman doesn't need to settle for that because he has earned a big time NHL contract. So barring that miraculous human interest story where Swayman takes less to keep Ullmark around, it appears as though Ullmark indeed will be traded. I'd be fine with getting a first-round draft pick since they don't have a first, second, or third this year, and then turning around and signing Swayman to a long-term contract extension. $6 million would be ideal. If they could get that to 6 years, that would be even better. We'll see if he's willing to settle for that or if he pushes for more, which is well within his rights to look for 7, 8. But he is a restricted free agent, of course, and doesn't have a ton of leverage aside from entertaining offer sheets. We're going to turn our attention more towards the forward core and what a Bruins dream offseason would look like in terms of signings up front here as the podcast continues. Policygenius is where we need to look if you are in the market for life insurance. Life is unpredictable. A good life insurance policy plan gives your family a financial safety net to protect against some of the unknowns. Policygenius is the country's leading online insurance marketplace. It makes choosing the right policy for your family easy and quick. With Policygenius, you can find life insurance policies that start at just $292 per year for $1 million of coverage. Some options are 100% online and let you avoid unnecessary medical exams. Policygenius has no incentive to recommend one insurer over another. You can trust their guidance. Thousands of 5-star reviews on Google from customers who found the best fit for their needs. Get peace of mind by finding the right life insurance with Policygenius. Head to policygenius.com or click the link in the description to get your free life insurance quotes and see how much you could save at policygenius.com. Thank you so much once again for making Locked On Bruins part of your daily routine, free and available on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. While you're on YouTube, check out Locked On Sports Today, all the latest news, opinions, analysis from across the Locked On Sports universe. There'll be some NHL content on there as Game 1 of the Stanley Cup Final is set for Saturday night. And you can also catch up on Game 1 of the NBA Finals, in which the Boston Celtics took a series lead over the Dallas Mavericks. Let's continue our look at the Bruins' dream offseason as per Fluto Shinzawa and my thoughts thereon. Number 3 is a bit of a surprise, and it's something that I am completely on board for, and it's a re-signing of Jake DeBrusk. Surprise, surprise, Fluto writes, both sides have a change of heart after months of inaction. Let me just pause right there. I don't think it's a change of heart required on Jake DeBrusk's side of things. I think he would like to stay in Boston. I think the reluctance more is on the Bruins side of things, as they're not quite willing to meet DeBrusk's asking price. But I think he, all things considered, would like to stay in Boston. Fluto continues, DeBrusk realizes he's happy in Boston and comes off his price. See, that's what I'm saying. His price is a bit high for the Bruins. And while I do say that he is happy in Boston and would like to stay, there's always the possibility of him seeing if he gets an offer from an Alberta team, the Oilers, maybe even the Flames. But we know his home is in Edmonton. And I've been making the comparison all week long between DeBrusk and Zach Hyman. The Leafs did not want to match Hyman's ask. They let him walk. He goes to Edmonton and has just a career season, 50 goals this year, on the verge of winning a Stanley Cup. Could easily see that happening with DeBrusk alongside Connor McDavid or Leon Draisaitl. Fluto continues, the Bruins acknowledge they need his top 6 presence and improve their offer, and the settlement is a 5-year, $25 million deal. I could see DeBrusk making anywhere between 5 and 6. And for those of you who talk about his inconsistency, which is very fair offensively, he's worth that kind of money as a top 6 winger. Not only because of the offense that he does bring and the potential he has to score each and every night, but also his two-way game. He's a very strong defensive player, kills penalties. He's a bona fide top 6 player, and a 5-year, $25 million contract would be a dream for the Boston Bruins. But at any rate, I mean, not at any rate, but I would like to see DeBrusk re-signed. That is part of my personal dream offseason for the Boston Bruins, keeping him in the mix. Next up on Fluto's list is the signing of Elias Lindholm. The right shot center did not make much of an impact with the Vancouver Canucks. As such, his price dips on the open market, and the Bruins are more than happy to take advantage. Fluto continues, the 29-year-old is not a line-driving center, but he gives the Bruins another Coyle-like pivot who can impact play at both ends. Lindholm slots in as the number 2 center beside Zacha, moving Coyle back to the third line. This deal, 7 years, $56 million. That's $8 million. If my math is right, 56 divided by 7, $8 million against the cap. This one I'm not as on board with. And he says it right here the 29-year-old is not a line driving center. That is what the Bruins need. If you're going to re-sign Jake DeBrusk, you need a line driving center. You need a playmaking center who can help bring out. They already have Charlie Coyle, Pavel Zacha. No disrespect to Elias Lindholm, but is he that much better than either of those two guys? He's already 29. You're going to give him 7 years, $8 million to a 29-year-old. I'm not too sure about that. Now, Elliot Friedman and Jeff Merrick discussed Lindholm on their 32 Thoughts podcast today. They said Lindholm got off to a rough start in Vancouver, but he seems to have an appetite to stay. They were projecting somewhere along $7 million per year. That would be a bit more palpable. But again, as good as he is, it's not a huge upgrade offensively, which is what the Bruins need. And if you're not going to get that scoring boost from that center himself, you need a guy who can make his wingers that much better, or a playmaking center. I don't know if he fits the bill. Again, I would much prefer to have them save some money and try to attract Draisaitl, or explore the secondary market for a center who can drive play a little bit more. I mean, Steven Stamkos might be a better option. I don't know. Lindholm at $8 million per year. That's a bit of a tough ask. That would make him the second highest paid forward on the team. And don't forget, he's, not the most explosive player offensively. He did have an 82-point season, 2021-22, 42 goals, 40 assists, but that could be a bit of an outlier. He's got 29 goals earlier, 27, 22, but this past season, 15 goals between the Flames and Canucks, 29 assists for 44 total points. Down year, turmoil with being traded, etc. Hopefully, if that could bring his value down a bit, then I would go for that at maybe $7 million. Not sure if I'd jump into the $8 million range for him. That's just my opinion. Let me know what you think in the comments or on social media. All right, there's a couple more aspects to Fluto's dream offseason for the Boston Bruins, and we will tackle that here as the podcast continues. Game 1 of the NBA Finals is in the books, and if you're looking to get to Game 2 at TD Garden, then Game Time is the place you want to look. They make getting NBA Finals tickets fast and easy. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to tip-off, with amazing last-minute deals, all-in prices, panoramic views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. I used it last month to get baseball tickets. Fantastic deal. I knew exactly what to expect when I reached the venue. And you can also get tickets for comedy, concerts, theater near you. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Game Time, last minute tickets at the lowest price guaranteed. All right, on Fluto's dream offseason list for the Boston Bruins is something that I am very into, and that would be a reunion between the Bruins and Tyler Bertuzzi. Those of you who have been listening to the podcast for a while know that I was incredibly pumped when the Bruins acquired Bertuzzi. It was something that I had suggested on social media before it happened. I was ridiculed by some people for it. But when he came to the Bruins, it was a fantastic match. Fluto writes, it was a good match, good fit the first time around. Should be just as good on Bertuzzi's second spin. This time, the Bruins offered the greasy left shot wing the term he wanted the first time. The 29-year-old, who sparred with Brad Marchand during round 1, is delighted to rejoin his fellow irritant and perhaps even ride on his line. The deal, 4 years, $19 million. I'm a huge Tyler Bertuzzi guy. I have been since he played up here in the OHL for the Guelph Storm. He went out and saw whether the grass is greener up here in Toronto. He was not super great with the Maple Leafs. He had an opportunity to play with some of their top talent. Wasn't the greatest fit. He did have 21 goals, 22 assists, 80 games, 1 goal in 7 games against the Bruins in the playoffs. Far cry from his 62-point in 68 game performance with the Red Wings a couple years ago, 16 points in 21 games for the Bruins last season. I'd be very into this reunion. Who knows if Bertuzzi wants to come back? We see all the time guys getting into it on the ice and acknowledging that once you're off the ice, things are different. It would be great to see him back in black and gold this time long term. I would love to see that. The other bit here is a Brad Marchand extension. There's no rush to re-sign him. He's under contract for 1 more season. But by giving him a new deal, Fluto writes, the Bruins put him at ease. There's risk in signing Marchand at 36 to a multi-year extension, but the Bruins are confident his commitment to training reduces the risk of injury. As for Marchand, a new contract, Fluto writes, optimizes his push not just to peak for the Bruins, but also to compete for Canada at the 2026 Olympics. It would please Marchand to no end to play on an all Nova Scotia line with Sidney Crosby and Nathan MacKinnon. A 2-year deal Fluto proposes at $5 million per year would keep him under contract through that 2026 season and allow him to go to the Olympics representing the Boston Bruins, representing Team Canada. And how great would that be? Now, speaking of Crosby, we'll talk about this another day, but he can become an unrestricted free agent next summer. If the Penguins have another year like they did and miss the playoffs once again, what are the chances that he trades Pittsburgh's colors for Boston's and finishes his career playing with Brad Marchand in Boston? How cool would that be? Now, the last part of Fluto's dream offseason is kind of internal improvements. Matt Poitras, Fabian Lysell, Georgi Merkulov hitting the gym hard and making an impact for the Boston Bruins next season. He writes, perhaps the biggest reason Poitras cut his rookie season short was that undergoing shoulder surgery in February would set him up for a full training load in the summer. The right shot center takes advantage of the timing, puts on the muscle needed to turn lost puck battles into wins. Ditto for Lysell and Merkulov. By becoming stronger on the puck, all three put themselves in line for full-time NHL duty in 2024-25. The Bruins need their skill and cost efficiency on the varsity. That would be ideal as well. The nightmare version of that is none of those guys improving over the offseason, none of those guys making the team. The Bruins, they had those cheap veterans this season in James Van Riemsdyk, Kevin Shattenkirk. Now, if they let those guys go, they're looking to inject some speed into the lineup, some skill. Poitras, Lysell, Merkulov, Lohrei on the back end, all making, entry-level money. That would be a huge bonus for the Boston Bruins, especially if they're going to be investing big money into some free agents, maybe Lindholm, DeBrusk, re-signing Tyler Bertuzzi perhaps as well. You could have 3 or even 4, if you include Johnny Beecher in that, guys making very little against the cap here in 2024, 2025. You would have Beecher at $925,000. Brazeau at $775,000. Merkulov, $925,000. Lysell, $863,000. And Patra at $870,000. Imagine getting value out of all of those guys while able to spend money elsewhere. That would be huge. So that's the dream offseason for the Boston Bruins, according to Fluto, with some of my thoughts mixed in there. Let me know what you think by dropping a comment on the YouTube channel or on social media at Locked NHL Bruins. Thank you so much for joining me on this week's episodes. We'll be back next week, daily, talking about the Boston Bruins, because that's what we do here on Locked On Boston Bruins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your favorite team every single day. Have a great weekend, friends. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. We'll catch you here on the flip side.